Kusha is a client of mine who came in to say that, hey, I just have rage. So can you just like give me the right sex toy? We ended up going years and years, and as our work deepened, she uncovered something called a buried memory. She was 6, 7 years old. She was taking a bath. She came out of the bathroom. Older person gazing at her and literally like perving. So she got really scared and she shouted. But it manifested later on. At 22, she was like, why am I not able to enjoy sex? Because the moment she would insert something or even give herself the permission to be naked by herself, she would feel that man's gaze internalized in her body. Shame can mess up our chemistry, our brain wiring, and it can make us gravitate towards people, ideas, things, concepts that actually are very hurtful to us.
Victims constantly feeling like a victim.
Therapists are guilty of enabling. We enable too much. People are picking up on this.
Well, thank you, Neha Bhat, for joining me on this discussion on Zen-Brain. For all those of you who don't already know Neha, she is, and I hope I get this right, she's a practicing clinical sex-focused trauma therapist and is the author of this book, Unashamed, which I read like a textbook 2 weeks ago. I started reading this book really expecting the usual chatter about sex-related issues, but I have to say this, it caught me completely unawares, shocked me, made me extremely uncomfortable. And here is why. Because I think every woman born and brought up in India, and I'm sure a lot of men too, have faced some sort of sexual trauma that we haven't even considered labeling as trauma in the first place. Aggressive groping, having someone masturbate publicly in public transportation, and even hearing about violent sexual acts against women on a daily basis on the news can be extremely triggering and traumatizing. And it's sad that every time, Neha, we bring up sex in India, for most women, and I say this for most, not all, it's associated less with desire and more with violence. And that's really what I want to begin with.
Sure.
Protests continue as we speak in West Bengal after the gruesome rape and murder of this young female medic at this Kolkata hospital. And it's yet again conjured up raw emotions in most of us women, that feeling of discomfort, anger, frustration, even fear. Talk to us about how incidents like this one or the Delhi gang rape that happened in 2012 can impact someone, especially young women.
Yeah, thank you for that lovely question, and thanks for having me, and also for the kind words of the book. And I have been noticing that it has taken a lot of serious readers by shock, because I think we have so much content out there talking very superfluously about sex positivity, which is very important. We don't even have that much sex education we don't have access to, but we're missing the iceberg. So I start really with the iceberg of trauma, and to say that, everything impacts the way one shows up, specifically the way one holds one's body, specifically the way one speaks, the way one's fantasies, what one considers healthy, not healthy. These are not things that just one makes up, out of one's ass, for the lack of a better term. And I'm a direct and blunt speaker, as I'm a direct, blunt writer. So just for whoever's
out for that.
So it's not really that it just comes out of nowhere. It comes from the realm of the psyche, which we define in depth therapy as marked by many factors: sociology, religion, values, morals, what our parents said, etc., etc. So in India, the thing that I kind of start also with, really why I wanted to write the book, why I do what I do, is that absolutely from where you started, there isn't anything written for the Indian context. There are all these theories developed by Europeans for Europeans within the European American context, which is very important, great, good for them, but it doesn't apply directly like that. It's not a formula that can just be applied to masses of people everywhere in the world. We have a different context. And so our context is this, that right now I see us as a very broken sort of consciousness. We're healing from colonial trauma. We're healing from our own religious ideas of where we want to be as a nation, all of that. Majority, minority, forget that. Just as what is religion to us today? These are very important questions that are coming up, right? So hence, what are our values today? So when we see these kind of cases activating the collective conscious, what I notice happen is that we take in these angry stances and then we go, which we have to protect, what happened because our justice system isn't able to serve us fully. And then we have people going really kind of berserk and going, oh my God, I'm so upset, I'm so upset, I'm so upset. Mothers are telling their daughters, fathers are telling their children, be careful. This happens all the time. Don't go out late at night. Wear something decent. Nobody's going to help you. This is constant conditioning. So, of course, this conditioning in depth psychology, and I'll end here to this question, is that we internalize these conditionings, these narratives as true without even questioning if there's a truth outside of these narratives that may not be so polarized and extreme.
Mm-hmm. So getting back to the question, how do you think this kind of assault, sexual assault, how does this impact a young girl? Even reading about it, even, looking at the visuals, if not of the assault, constantly having visuals on news channels. It happened during the case of Nirbhaya. We were constantly told about how brutal the entire incident really was. How does that impact someone?
Yeah. So I gave you the abstracts. Now let me give you the practical, right? The practical is really that it impacts a lot of women as imposing on their idea of what healthy touch and sexuality is. So it corrodes it. It already says that everybody that you have supposed to interact with is out to kind of hurt you, probably will hurt you. When you go to a club, you may get assaulted. So automatically you have to protect yourself because all men are XYZ. Not only then the narrative goes forward, it's not just that all men are. If you get pregnant by someone, they're not going to come to your rescue, and especially if it's non-consensual and it's rape, you're alone. And then, and the more extreme things I hear is that your family is going to be impacted. Your entire family is going to be picked up by the media as the case to highlight. So people, so women survivors, specifically female survivors, already go through this kind of like idea of saying that I am going to be in that place of the survivor from Nirbhaya, of the medic, the young medic, So I'm just going to protect myself from that. And how do I protect myself from that? There are two ways. Either I just live a double life where I don't tell anyone about what I'm actually doing so that nobody's worried about me and I just go get my needs met. Or I just become really hyper vigilant, which is a lot of us Indian women. There's a lot of shame, repressed, repressed desire. There's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of vigilance. I think
What
that's,
do you mean by hypervigilance? Just
yeah.
define it for us.
Yeah, vigilance is when I'm, very naturally, rationally scared or fearful or afraid. I have boundaries. I'm protective. Hypervigilance is, oh, you made that gesture. Perhaps you're gesturing someone else to ask the next question. Oh, is there a hidden camera somewhere there that's actually like recording me? So it's hypervigilant. I'm not just protecting myself. I'm actually going one step above and beyond and making sure that you are not the aggressor. And you have given me no rational reason to think so. I'm already coming in with my narrative that you're out to get me.
Right, right. Do you think most Indian women go through that though?
I actually think here's where I do a little myth busting. I think all Indian people go through this, including Indian men. In fact, 90% of my practice is Indian men. You will not believe my sex therapy practice is 90% Indian men. And there is so much vigilance in the body. Oh, she's not really marrying me for me, she's marrying me for XYZ. I had sex with her and now I'm not sure what her signals are. This is from the male perspective. She's saying she's enjoying it. I don't know, because tomorrow her parents will say I'm not the right person, so she may change her mind. Will I be labeled a rapist? From her perspective, very binary, woman versus man, just for now, woman and man. From a female perspective, it's very much that kind of sexual hypervigilance of like, I've had sex once, so now he's out to hurt me. This is very, very, it gets internalized. There's not a lot of like distance from the pain, which is what repeated news stories do, right? You're constantly being told you are going to be hurt.
Yeah.
So then you're going into the world saying, I'm going to be hurt. I'm going to be hurt.
Wow. I had this discussion on sex a couple of months ago, and it was brought up by the doctor we were interviewing that women weren't able to have sex for the longest time post Nirbhaya.
Post Nirbhaya, for about 5 years, I have had many women, newly married couples coming where there is an entity called sexual aversion disorder. So women developed, aversion to any touch.
There are young people. I think young people by nature are very impacted by media. And today's Gen Z, today's millennials are very impacted by what they see on Instagram, social media, and the media narratives of what their friends are saying. If you're 35 plus or 40 plus, it's a different ballgame for you, especially as an Indian woman. You're a little more cynical, of course, but also more realistic that yes, activation, collective overheating, but not necessarily in my friend circle that do I have to stop hooking up or do I have to stop dating because Nirbhaya has happened and because of Kolkata case has happened. So it varies. But what I'm seeing more and more, which is concerning in my practice, is young people, the splitting they're experiencing. It's a concept I talk about in the book also, psychological splitting. It goes into very either or thinking, either all men are safe or they're not safe, all women are gold diggers or they're not. It goes into this kind of split, which is very extreme. India is very safe, India is not very safe. None of those are true. It all depends on where you are, what the judicial layout of the system is there, who's your family, what are your friends like. I have excellent, very sensible clients in rural areas who have the most open sex lives, right? And their community is very sex positive in their little cocoon. Outside of the cocoon is very different. So it's so contextual for us that I think some of these splits show up out of fear also, to kind of make the subject very easy and just tell people like, ye hai ya nahi hai, so that you have more control over your young people or over the narrative. And it's not as simple.
It's not as simple. And there are a lot of gray areas, more gray areas than black or white, right? I want to digress just a little bit. I actually went back to a book that was written by my friend Revati Lal. She's written a very powerful book called The Anatomy of Hate. I don't know whether you've read this.
I've heard of it. I have not read it.
About the violence perpetrated during the Gujarat riots of 2002. And in order to understand why this kind of violence even took place, she chose to focus not on the victims, but the perpetrators. What makes people do what they do? Hurt people? Maybe hurt people, right? Unfortunately, as a society, Neha, we seem to be creating more and more perpetrators and predators. Is this, in your experience, true? I have two prong question. Number one, do you feel sexual assaults have risen? Number two, have you had the chance to work with perpetrators and what makes them do what they do?
Yeah, I actually started India's first group 15 years ago for perpetrators of rape. And it was actually an online group I ran for many years. We did restorative justice accountability circles, and not just criminally diagnosed perpetrators, let's say, but more criminally proven, more like regular people who got called out during Me Too. 2017, 2018, 2019, especially public like media people and artists, theater people, Indians who wanted to heal, who wanted to not just heal themselves, but also help their companies not get into this again. And because there were no judicial measures that came out after Me Too anyway, it was like in India, it's all a conversation, it's all informal, our structures are not yet in place, etc. So I ran it quite successfully, I have to say, because there was just so much need for a space which recognizes for survivors, and it was very specific. It was people who have survived assault, who have then perpetrated assault in some way, men, women, or trans people. Coming to your question about has it increased or decreased, I actually see it as neither. I see that the awareness has increased, but the rate of perpetration remains. It remains the same. There's no logical reason why it should decrease or increase, right? It's part of the human shadow. It has happened century after century, like how we say yuga after yuga. It has happened all the time. So when you look at it that way, the American statistic is 1 in 3 women are assaulted or violated every minute. 1 in 6 men assaulted, violated every minute, and 1 in 2 transgender people. because they have RAIN, they have their national statistics, so they're able to do that. We don't have a national statistic that's about per minute per kind of thing. We have some new statistics that have come up, which is helpful, but it doesn't actually kind of point to which district, why, cultural context. It's too much of it's a huge exercise if we were to do it in our context. But what I see is, because this is the positive of social media, because the awareness has come in, lot more people are talking about it, and lot more people are reporting it also. Even the reporting has gone up. Whether the act has decreased or increased, we have no logical way to like state that.
You say that there's no way of really knowing whether there are more perpetrators or predators. But the very fact that people have been allowed to get away in the past has encouraged more people to commit heinous acts, knowing that the victim is not going to talk about it. Many people don't want to talk about it, but how do you enable them to open up to authorities?
I worked at a rape crisis center for 11 years. That was my main job. And after which I came to India and I worked in the Thane and Baikala jails. So this is the next part of what I did, right? And just as a bicultural person, both it's not like India is better or the US is better. Both the context, the systems are just so different, but also so archaic. There's so much red tape that in general, reporting is a really heinous activity. Actually, I call it heinous only because you have to again and again repeat your story. You have to provide evidence. And, being on the other side, being on the side of the lawyer, being on the police side, I understand why it is heinous and grieved, because it's just so much. You have to have some way of assessing whether this happened, what is the extent of it, etc., etc. So in a way, consent laws have to be looked at. Each particular state has a different consent law in the US. In India, it's not so, but the state of alcohol, like the age of alcohol is different, the age of like sexual activity is different, So all these are like factors which come in to kind of saying why reporting is a complex task. Now, I do not take the activist stance on this. I used to many years ago when I was part of those grassroots activist kind of groups. But overall, because my skill set is a little different, I found it a very exhausting and mentally draining exercise. And I say this because a lot of activists are my clients. They read my books. It's I have that kind of like following of people who are very justice driven. And I say, if you're going to be justice driven and if you're taking a systemic stance, that's a different outlook to this entire approach, to this entire problem. If you're taking a more interpersonal stance, which is now mine, then we have a different answer to this, which is that reporting comes secondary, healing comes first. Justice and healing can go hand in hand, but they are not synonymous. They are not the same. So in fact, I work with people for 16 to 18 sessions. I used to provide crisis therapy when my practice was open. Now it's not open, but I used to have 16 to 18 sessions of just actually stabilizing a survivor, male, female, queer, to come to the point of like, what do you want? Do you want to go back to your family if your dad is the rapist? I mean, I can't provide you housing, right? We don't have housing measures in the country. We don't even have people like fed in our country. So we don't have like housing measures for survivors. It's too much, too intense. America, we do. We don't have that here. So what do you want to do? Do you want to get a 1 BHK in Bombay away from your parents? Let's work on that. So that goes from like 10, 12, 16 sessions. It brings a little bit more stability. After that point, this is where art therapy comes in, sex therapy comes in. Now, once you're stabilized, it can take anywhere from 6 months to a year, or maybe 12 to 16 sessions if the person is very like ready. What do you want to do next? So I have lots of clients who end up writing anonymous posts to the police, to the government across the political spectrum, wherever you are. You can tell your authority that this has happened. You have to go through the system. So I have many survivors who end up writing anonymous letters, posting it online and saying, this has happened. I don't want to name myself. I don't even want to name the person who did it. I just need the world to know this happened to me. Now, this is a very different stance from saying like, let's get legal justice. There are other people who go legal justice way. Then you have a team of people assisting them to move. So I'm just like explaining the process, which is quite detailed. Going from foundation, safety building to kind of reporting, then reporting. This is somebody more financially privileged who can pay for all those additional resources to then take them through a legal process. So many ways, just to say that there's many ways, but I would not start by saying, let's report. I would get to it.
I like what you said. In the interpersonal realm, healing comes first, and most of the victims perhaps prefer that. Let's get back to what this book is all about. How would you describe trauma to a layperson?
Yeah, trauma is a psychological, emotional scar. It can also be a spiritual scar. It's a scar of the esoteric. It's not a very tangible scar. That is trauma. But it is not dependent on the external event. You and I could have gone through the same external event and you would have a different impact and I would have a different impact. So trauma is the internalization of the external event. Let me repeat that. It's the internal scar of the external event.
It's how it affects you. It may affect you in ways that you yourself aren't able to understand, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are two kinds of external events that we categorize broadly in trauma therapy. One is small t trauma, one is big T trauma. Small t, which is what I went into the book as well. Small t is something like bullying. Again, not to like trigger anybody that my bullying is not big T. No, but there are just to assess. There are degrees and variances. Small t would be bullying, loss of a pet, an emotional sort of a scuffle with somebody close to you. Big T would be gang rape, accident, death, huge losses suddenly, earthquake, natural disasters, immigration related things, all those things, like things that just kind of debilitate your entire life circumstance.
How does it show up, Neha? Let's talk about, say, a big T or a couple of big T's and some small T's. How do they show up in life, maybe years later?
So, for example, Kusha, the person I speak about in chapter 1, is a client of mine who came in to say that, hey, I just have rage. So can you just like give me the right sex toy? She thought sex therapy was all about me just telling her, like, go to this brand, get this. This is the right thing for you. And over time, she ended up taking a liking to me. I ended up connecting with her really well. So we ended up going years and years. And as our work deepened, she uncovered something called a buried memory around something that could be categorized as a small T trauma. And we'll go into why. She was 6, 7 years old. She was taking a bath. She came out of the bathroom, regular South Indian person, and huge, beautiful window by her room. There was a person gazing. There's an older can't call him a gentleman, older person gazing at her and literally like perving. So she got really scared and she shouted. Now her mother actually came immediately when she screamed, shut the window and hugged this girl. The small t part is that violation happened on her naked body, right? But it manifested later on at 22 or something. She was very young when she came. At 22, whenever she would masturbate, whenever she would try to get ahead in her sex life, she went to a college where it was very liberal, sex positive, everyone was in romances, etc. She was like, why am I not able to enjoy sex? Because the moment she would insert something or even give herself the permission to be naked by herself, she would feel that man's gaze internalized in her body, which is a very subtle thing. Like when we started the conversation, we said we haven't even started naming these things for us as a society, right? Because we were so in survival. Now, as this was happening for her, it went into a big T kind of thing where for years she couldn't masturbate, which is not a small thing, right? Like a healthy function of your body is being repressed. And women her age by 22, even if we're a conservative society, our girl children masturbate, boys masturbate, people have active, healthy lives inside. We just don't talk about it. So she was very much in this comparison. Now, the small t part is the mother came and protected her. Now, in other families, what happens is sometimes when we are a little bit more cruel, our parents are a little bit more emotionally unavailable, not able to be there. Sometimes mothers come and slap the child and say, why were you naked? What's wrong with you? Go say sorry to the uncle. It's actually your fault that you were naked, etc., etc.
So it's like double trauma.
And unprocessed because it's like normalized.
Actually, Kusha's example really stood out because, we often associate trauma as something happening to us, right? Like physically happening to us. But in this case, it didn't physically happen to her. But assault doesn't need to be physical.
No,
Right. I
doesn't.
think that was the point, and it came across very beautifully. Where does shame come in, and where does this whole concept of pleasure then come in?
Yeah. So it's a very beautiful question, and it's important to understand what shame is, right? Shruti? Shame is at the core of it an old feeling. It's a mixed emotion. It's like we have primary colors, secondary colors, red, blue, green is primary, so everybody knows. But purple, what is purple? Sometimes it's a little bit of brown, sometimes it's a little bit of yellow. What is. So shame is like that. Your shame and my shame can look very different, but they have the same impact where it kind of like closes us up. We feel like, I don't deserve this interview. I don't deserve to write a book. I don't deserve to have sex. I don't deserve to feel sexy because that man looked at me and I was at fault. So shame gives us these kind of, I would say, very extreme views on ourselves. And it says we are the problem and we caused it. So we caused our own trauma. We are causing our own suffering. This is different from saying I am responsible for my life moving ahead. Of course I am. Because sometimes people hear this and they're like, are you just going to blame your parents all your life? Are you just going to blame society all your life? No. And in fact, if one is doing that, that is not healing. In fact, and that is happening a lot today in the younger generation. It's all like anybody else's responsibility. No. Which is what I write in part 4 of the book, like that's not really trauma healing. Trauma healing is I have some responsibility, but there's also a lot of factors that were not in my control because I was 6, because I was 7. I didn't ask for the uncle to come. I didn't even know. It was my mother's job. She is the parent. She did the best that she could, etc., etc. But at 21, it's my job now to really take all of this into account and move to progress, right? So, which is a little advanced. And this will, I think, be like my next books. But that is shame. Shame doesn't allow progress to happen because it says you and solely you were the one who caused this trauma in yourself. So you shouldn't have been naked. You shouldn't even have had a bath. You should have known that the windows are open. And then it says when you try to heal, it says, you know what? Actually, you don't deserve to heal. Actually, you don't even deserve a good boyfriend. Actually, you don't deserve love.
When somebody goes through deep self-esteem issues, it's worthwhile digging up. And I love how you talk about inner work all the time. I've literally like done it like a worksheet. So
Amazing.
thank you for that. I just want to bring up pleasure and
Pleasure.
how pleasure, sort of gets into this whole concept of shame.
There's another example of Rahul, a person who's queer, who was bullied a lot by his teachers. And I write a little bit about the roots of sexual shame. And he was told that he was, too feminine, etc., etc. Grew up thinking something's wrong with him. When he tried to experience sexual pleasure with another guy as a gay person, he would choose partners just like his narcissistic teacher or like his bully, who would actually not really love him. They would not really even give him self-respect or give him like admiration or anything. But for him, shame had become kind of mixed with this idea that I am bad. So I now am choosing people who make me feel bad. And somehow that's giving me some pleasure. And I'm thinking that's the maximum pleasure I will get. Okay, so sometimes shame can mess up our chemistry, our brain wiring, and it can make us gravitate towards people, ideas, things, concepts that actually are very hurtful to us, right? And so it makes us feel bad for even trying to change the pattern. This is why abusive relationships, the other chapter I go into, where the Fiza and her partner who come into therapy, Fiza is this young person who says, Neha, I love him, but he molested my best friend. So help us through therapy to get through this. And so I was like, of course, I'll help you if that's what you want, but are you sure that's what you want? And she was like, yeah, we can fix him. With you and me, we can just fix him. And he came in being like, this is not a big deal. I didn't molest her. This woman's dramatic, etc., etc. Later on saying, no, I did molest her. It was a mistake, but I'm not ready for therapy. So Fiza's choosing again and again because of her shame and being the good daughter in her family and thinking she has to caregive and provide for the men in her life, constantly choosing these narratives which say that even if you're hurtful and abusive to people in my own life, like physically, I still am responsible to heal you and help you. Now, her neurochemistry, her neurobiology has associated love to caregiving and caretaking, which is a deep form of kind of shame that's manifested here. And it's hard to explain this in like these sentences. So I'm sure if readers do the work of going through part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, Shruti, they may also come to that realization of what you're saying, that it's the one's dots will connect. I mean, I'll end this by saying that the book has been written in these 4 parts for this reason. I didn't want it to be just like a gentle read or anything. I actually wanted it to be a journey. Like if you have never accessed trauma therapy, and what are the chances that you will in India? It's a very elite and niche profession. Then here is a book that can take you through the aspects of that so that you may end up with a trauma map. When you go to a therapist yourself, or when you go to a friend, or when you talk about it, you'll have much more of a toolbox.
It's a great way to begin. It's a great place to begin. And you do talk about writing being one of the ways in which to access this trauma journey, right? And again, I'm stressing over here, trauma doesn't really necessarily mean the assault. It may be some trauma that you have buried deep down, something that happened in your childhood that is affecting your life. And that brings me to my next question. Let's talk about how shame, how trauma impacts love relationships first, and what can we do? What can somebody who's undergoing this? Because I know you brought up this whole thing, like this concept of recreating the normal that you grew up with. You constantly recreate that normal, which may not be the right thing to do, right? Which may not be the healthier alternative, but one does that. So, yeah, please go ahead.
Well, depth psychology teaches us, and also our own life experiences teach us this, that the first couple of partners we choose tend to be mirrors of whatever is familiar to us. We may not even know that this is familiar to us. So if anyone's listening, go back to your first crush, go back to maybe a teacher that you liked, something even that didn't even manifest in anything, but your fantasy of who was attractive to you, and try to map that person's characteristics with the characteristics of your caregivers that you grew up around. It can be if you're a single mom, that's fine. It can be a house help who was maybe your mother figure. It can be a grandmother, someone who was very close to you, and see how those traits play out. 90% of the time, you will see a link if you think about it deeply, right? Now, when you start thinking about it deeply, the second way to know that something is repressed or something is traumatic, I have a trauma response in me, is to see your reaction. So sometimes we watch lust stories or something like that on Netflix or one of these OTT platforms, and we instantly freeze up when there's a sex scene. Why does that happen so much for Indian mothers? Why does it happen so much for Indian women of a different generation? Because of course, shame, but repressed stuff. That character is playing out things that one has never even externalized, right? So that's a trigger. So if you're noticing that, forget your mom, you can't help other people, but if you can help yourself, if you feel that in yourself, then that's a point of noticing, oh, I guess there's some work for me to do around why is my reaction so big that I want to like shut this off. That's one way to know. So now when you map both of these, one is the thing we talked about, that my earliest attraction can be something familiar. Familiar doesn't necessarily mean great for me. Sometimes my dad's an abuser and I'm attracting really kind of selfish men. Sometimes my mom is very sacrificial and I'm attracting men who are like doormats to me. That can also happen. There can be many ways to look at this. And of course, the book goes into that, which then you take to what is my response to my partner? Is my response very extreme or is it contextually appropriate, right? Now, let me give an example. Someone on the street is trying to hurt me, or in a bus in Delhi is trying to hurt me. I don't have to be compassionate and kind and just take it and be healthy and regulated. That's not contextually appropriate. Someone's trying to hurt you, you defend yourself, whatever your defense is, right? But if someone's not actually trying to hurt you and it's a scuffle, it's a disagreement, it's a difference of opinion, it's a life story that's different from you, and your reaction is still to defend yourself. Your reaction is very much like leaving the restaurant, being like, I'm blocking this person, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, the 4 conflict styles. Then you notice, oh, I'm bringing something to this relationship that's not from the present, it's from the past. This is how we know where shame has now come in, and shame is one manifestation. Now, most people, many Indians, we are not taught to confront these things. We're taught to kind of run away from them or just kind of like let them be, which is a shame response, which is like, Shruti's going to feel so bad if I just tell her that I didn't like the way that she asked me that question, and she's my best friend and I love her and I have incredible affection for her. But I needed to let her know, like, please don't do that. I don't like it. We're not taught this. We're taught just leave it. This is your boss. This is your uncle. You say sorry.
Yeah, it's not the polite thing to do. I need to revisit victims constantly feeling like a victim. And I have to tread this question
Yeah.
very carefully, only because I have had friends who for years
Yeah.
and years and years have been allowed to get away with what I now label as bad behavior, as an excuse, like, oh, I've been through this constantly. Like, when is it time to stop? And I like say this with the deepest
Compassion.
understanding and
Yes.
respect, that I would never understand what they went through, but
Yes.
there's got to be some boundary, some time in life where you stop
That's
and
right.
you appreciate the fact that, I'm a friend. I haven't done this to you personally, right? And I deserve some understanding. So,
Yes. Benefit of the doubt, leeway, effort, all of
yes,
that.
yeah,
Trust, faith.
yeah. So, my question to you is, how does one tackle this?
Yeah, I have quite a long answer to this, which I'll try to not like give you that the sermon. This is like my favorite topic to talk about. Which because
I'm so happy to hear that, because it's almost like people tread around this because they don't want to hurt victims. We then become victims ourselves.
And at some point, therapists are guilty of enabling. We enable too much. There is a reason why books like Coddling of the American Mind and all are popular. However, they are written, forget about it. But like people are picking up on this, that just because there is trauma therapy language now out in the collective and people are talking about psychology and mental health, does not mean that we get to be in victimization as the only phase of healing. This is step one. Step 5 is what you're talking about. So let's contextualize it, right? Step 5 is part 4 of the book. Okay, I have listened. Okay, I have deepened my understanding. Okay, now I kind of have my trauma map. Now what? Now I have to be consistently attuned to my experience so that I move out of this victimization into faith, courage, recovery, resilience, joy, pleasure. So right now we have everything mixed up in the mainstream, and for Indian context, I see it like this because there was so much repressal. Suddenly there is this permissible language which has come from America. First, it was European colonization. Now I see it as an American like imperialism type of thing. I'm being very like flippant with the word. Of course, I don't mean that, but like it is an American. Yeah, it's a permission. So now this permission. So now I get to say to my friend, hey, I'm triggered. I'm not triggered. If she's like my really good friend and I know her for 25 years, I'm probably not triggered. I'm upset and probably I'm triggered about something else. But I can't label her an unsafe bully, especially if she just has a difference of opinion or she's saying something to me that may be for my benefit. Like, this is where we've got all the terms kind of mixed up and everything extreme is being used. I've written ample on this. Gaslighting. Gaslighting is a very serious thing that happens in abusive relationships again and again. I can't use gaslighting casually in a conversation where I'm feeling gaslit. No, you are allowed to have a different memory of what happened. Second word, ghosting. Oh my gosh, now younger generation has made this like ghosting is what happened to me. And so I'll ask, how? Show me. And they'll show me the text messages, and it's literally like two friends saying, okay, I'll catch up with you later, and the friend forgot. That was not meant to be. That was not what ghosting was. Ghosting was like, we've had a fight. You are asking me for answers, and I've just left you on red, and I'm not taking responsibility for my part of the fight. So these are this has all gone out of the window, and I don't see instant solution to this. I think consciousness has to mature, like just the way that we were in repressal for so many years. We're not going to suddenly get to stage 5. We are at stage 1. But what's important is conscious conversations like this, where somebody like you who is, or maybe somebody who's in your position, who's hoping for stage 5, they're hoping for their friend to reach stage 5. Perhaps they can have a little more compassion for their experience. So have compassion for your experience, that actually it's your boundary that's getting crossed. Because again and again and again, that person's getting away with behavior that you don't approve of. Right?
There's no accountability also.
Yes.
It's constantly being questioned about your intention, trust issues that somebody else may have with someone else who has wronged them, but you are at the receiving end of it.
Yes, yes. But your position, the position as the friend who's saying, I still love you, I need accountability, and I need you to, when you come to stage 5, I'll be ready, is a very wise one. We cannot lose this voice. What's happening is we're losing this voice because everybody's scared. And it's happening at all levels. It's not only this therapy level is a very small level. It's happening in every realm. Everything has just become everything else. It's like, no, things are still, we must compartmentalize. We must know what we're talking about. I have clients come to me because of this idea of rape. It's like, they'll say things like marital rape. And this is a very difficult one. And of course, I'm nobody to gaslight. But I will have to do a little bit of like work with that client to say what felt like rape, what felt like uncomfortable sex with your husband. Let's distinguish. And many times, this is a very difficult thing to talk about, but many times people will say, oh my gosh, I guess I'm so focused now on rape, vigilance, every man is bad, that I'm not able to see that actually the sex that I had last night was just really rubbish. I just hated it. It was uncomfortable, it was distasteful. I just wish I had told him to stop. I didn't tell him. So then I ask, if you had told him, do you think he would have stopped? Yeah, of course. Okay, then this is workable. Does it happen 10 times? Does he just force himself on you? Yes. Okay, that's rape. So this distinction is so important. And I again reiterate, and I'll end the answer here to say this is actually a sign of, we talk about in trauma work, it's differentiation. So there's enmeshment and differentiation. Enmeshment is everything. So I'm just like my mother. I take on my mother's characteristics. I make my daughter exactly like my mother. Differentiation is my mother has these things. The world is like this. I get to choose the path where this is me. Okay, so you as a friend are saying, I would like this in this friendship. Are you able to or are you not able to? And from a compassionate lens.
Absolutely. Instead of now friends becoming punching bags, I don't think that's the way forward, even for someone who has gone through it, and definitely not fair to you as a friend. But I'm glad this came up in conversation, because it's come up in a lot of our conversations, in several forums, but nobody has really gone out and tried to tackle it, because it's always like your compassion should lay with the victim. And I'm not saying that, and I don't think we are saying that.
No.
Yes, we are compassionate about that, but we have to be compassionate to ourselves as well.
In fact, boundaries. In fact, that's the difference between compassion and coddling. Coddling is, I'm just going to say yes to whatever is good for you in the moment. Compassion is, I can see the big picture. You may not agree with the big picture. Sure, you may have a different idea. I may have a different idea. But I would like my friendship to be respectful to both people. For that, I would like you to be able to heal so that we can have easier conversations about this. Now, my friend may say, no, I'm not ready to do that. Fine, as long as they say that, and then I'm like, okay, now it's my decision. They've told me they don't want to. Do I still want to be in this person's proximity?
I have to bring in queerness, and thank you for redefining queerness for me in this book. I do have, a family member who's declared herself queer, and I have great respect for her. But my question is, do you feel like, in your experience, how has it been coming out as queer? Do you feel that the trauma is a lot more for queer people or for LGBTQ LGBTQ in general?
I think India is a neuroqueer country by nature. And by that, I mean there are many people here who live very differently from whatever the norm is, but inside. Ruth Vanita is my favorite academic scholar on this, lesbian. She writes in depth about how Indian lesbian relationships have not needed affirmation or rejection from the government because we have not been a government-led society. She's a researcher. She goes into the sociology of this very deeply, right? Which is why I brought in the term neuroqueer, which was actually by an integral studies researcher, saying that whenever you are outside of the norm, you can define yourself as neuroqueer, which is different from the norm. Now, some queer activists take offense to that because then they're like, well, then you're diluting the definition. But it's the same thing like saying you're diluting the definition of trauma. For a Western context, that makes sense. For our context, because it's been so tight and it's been so restricted, especially because of colonial trauma, I think it's beneficial for us to loosen these definitions a little bit to say, okay, yeah, maybe just my rape isn't traumatic, but the fact that I was born in this type of family could also be traumatic, which doesn't mean I need to get into victim mentality. Same with queerness. Maybe I can broaden my definition of what it means to be different from the norm. Now, I don't see food differences being as different here versus US. US, if you're, if a little bit different food-wise, clothes-wise, you stick out. Here, this is not the case. India is very diverse that way. But sexually, yes, when you label yourself sexually queer or you come out sexually queer, the oppression is massive. And the oppression, by oppression specifically, I mean the ostracization, the bullying, and the label that you are perverted or deviant. This is very scary and actually very sad because this is not even local to what possibly the temples are saying there, the scripture is saying in some ways, in other ways, of course, not. Or just ideas of what it used to be, what it means to be, different from the norm, to be a single mother and your children taking care of you. This is common in India. So I don't know why in the last couple of years or in the last, let's say 100 years, there's been this idea that single woman means she's deviant from the norm. This is again an European American idea. Here, this is not so rare. Go to any village. There are many single women living there in the communities helping them. There are many, wives of suicide victims who are running the family by themselves, communities helping them. It's the sexual label of it, which is quite deeply hurtful. And I think that is where the judgment comes from. I myself have gone through a lot of bullying around this. And it is necessary to speak on this many times to say that mindset, it is our job to change as queer activists, as leaders of private practices and hospitals. Like that's where we can do something to help Indians to just decolonize this part. Like, what's going on? Why do you think this is abnormal? Who are we hurting?
So a level of trauma, again, being that, do you feel that LGBTQ individuals actually undergo trauma, more trauma?
Yes.
So there's double trauma involved, of what you are feeling yourself while growing up and what others perceive of you and label you as.
Yes, and then the trauma of trying to be fixed, especially if you're from a middle class, lower middle class family where there is less access to normalization. You are going to be trying
accepted for who you are.
And I have to electrocution therapy was common. Going to a doctor and the doctor is saying change. Like this happened in front of my eyes. Some doctors calling me and saying, "Hey, I'm sending you my client. Help him to change this feminine gestures of the hand." And I was like, "What does that mean?" They're like, make him more masculine, because at the end of the day, I care for the family. And the doctor was saying, I don't want the family to get bullied in this particular neighborhood. And they were from let's say like a metro city, but from a middle class section of the metro city.
Still a long way to go, isn't it, Neha, in this aspect?
Yes.
I love how you said neuroqueerness has nothing to do with gender and sexuality. There's so much to talk about, really, so much to talk about. And I think I can go on and on and on, but I'll end here. For now, thank you so much for joining me on Zen-Brain. I'd just like to end with, we're all unique. I think we all need to remember we are unique, just like everybody else. So how one person responds to stress, or how we react to trauma, how we process, how we get on and move forward, how we heal, is different from another person. So let's not try and think about one size fitting all. That does not work. Number two, all of us live with some sort of shame or trauma. And
Yes.
a good way to begin inner work, I would say, is to start with this book. Really, thank you for writing it. It takes a lot to write something like this. It's beautifully written. And I'm not just saying it because I'm, interviewing you. This has really stood out for me. So thank you.
Most welcome. Thank you for summarizing actually my own work for me. That's actually very helpful for me as well. And for going in depth, and also for bringing up, because you went in depth, we could even have a conversation about what's even not directly addressed in the book, which leads to healing, like addressing one's own responsibility in how we heal. Victim mentality, getting out of it. These taboos, we've got to start addressing these as normal. It's okay. It's also, let's have compassion for victim mentality so that we can move away from it. Somebody doesn't need to shame themselves for being in victim mentality, but you need to know that there's an end point there.
There's an end point there, really. Well, thank you so much, Neha. And we hope to see you back on Zen Brain.
I'd love to come back. Thank you so much. Thank you. It was lovely.